While still standing, we take the national prayer, which of course is the second stanza of the national anthem, O God of creation, at the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. O God of creation, direct our noble cause, guide our leaders right, help our youth the truth to know, in love and honesty to grow, and living just and true, great lofty heights attain, to build a nation where peace and justice reign. May God in his infinite mercies answer all our prayers. Thank you. You may be seated, please. Honorable ministers of the Federal Republic that are here today, permanent secretaries, and very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I want to formally welcome every one of you to this public presentation and breakdown of the highlights of the 2022 Appropriation Bill. Just yesterday, Mr. President Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR, presented the proposed budget for the 2022 fiscal year titled Budget of Economic Growth and Sustainability to the National Assembly. Today, we are here to witness the breakdown of the highlights of the 2022 Appropriation Bill. You will agree with me that information is power. Correct information brings clear thinking, and clear thinking helps people to make sound judgments. I want to most sincerely welcome every one of you and thank you for finding time to be with us. Let me, at this point, introduce some of our dignitaries that we have on the high table here. Of course, we have with us the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, who is the chief host of this event, Dr. Mrs. Zainab Shamsuna Ahmed. Honorable Minister, I welcome you. Thank you very much for your time. We equally have with us the Honorable Minister of Information and Culture, Alhaji Lai Mohammed. Honorable Minister, I welcome you. Also with us, we have the Honorable Minister of Health, Dr. Osage Ehanire. We welcome you, sir. Thank you for being with us. We equally have with us the SSA to Mr. President, National Assembly Matters, House of Reps, and the person of Honorable Umar El Yakub. We welcome you. Thank you. It is very important to let you know that the Accountant General of the Federation is here, Malam Hadmi Idris. Thank you. We have with us the Chairman, Governing Board, National Bureau of Statistics Presidency, Dr. Kabir Nakaura with us. You are most sincerely welcome. We have with us, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the Permanent Secretary, Special Duties, Federal Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Alhaji Shehu Aliu Shinkafi. I welcome you. We have with us the Director General, Budget Office of the Federation, Mr. Ben Akabueze. I welcome you, sir. We have with us the Director General, DMO, Madam Patience Oneha. I welcome you. I want to believe I have actually introduced the Accountant General of the Federation, Malam Hamed Idris. Thank you very much. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is very important to let you know that this program is being beamed live by Channels Television. We want to thank Channels for this good gesture. We know that the media, apart from information, education, and their entertainment function, they perform another role, which of course is agenda-setting role on matters of public interest. Budgets is an issue of public interest. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, without taking much of our time, I want to, at this point, welcome the Director General Budget Office of the Federation, Mr. Ben Akabueze, to please step forward and give his welcome.
Recording
remarks.
in progress.
I want to invite him at this point. Thank you so much. Let's encourage you with our applause, please.
Honorable Ministers, in particular Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, may I respectfully request to stand on the already well-established protocols by the MC. And I am indeed standing, so I'm standing on the protocols. It's for me a great pleasure to welcome you all to this event. While this has become the norm to hold this event, for us, it is something that we consider a very critical part in this process of budget making. We do not yet have a budget. The budget is in process. Mr. President has laid the budget before the National Assembly. The budget belongs to the people of Nigeria, and therefore ultimately must work for the people. And so what we are doing today is accounting to the people. Unfortunately, we can't gather all of Nigeria to this venue, even including those, the hundreds that are connected online. But hopefully, those of you who have come today will represent the people of Nigeria in reflecting your views to us about the budget that we have prepared. We have used our best endeavors based on the information available to us, the resources available, and some information that you may not be privy to, in terms of the nitty-gritty pertaining to government's financial situation and government's priorities, and the driving principles and policies behind some of the decisions that have been reflected in this executive budget proposal. But this platform would provide an opportunity to clarify any such issues. The Honourable Minister will shortly be making a presentation, and thereafter we'll take questions. We'll also receive input, and if there are things that come up from here that we may have missed, as I said, the budget is still in process. It may then be reflected to the National Assembly, which has now, as they say, the ball is now in their courts. But we can still make input. You can still make input. I'm sure that in due course, the National Assembly itself will be, organizing public hearings on the budget, which is yet another opportunity for the Nigerian people to make an input into the budget. Without a doubt, one comment that you'll always get is there's not enough allocated to this sector or to this project or to that. And that's a comment that we usually do not contest, because as a point of fact, we will wish to see a much larger budget than this. But as you will hear when the Honourable Minister makes her presentation, there are fiscal challenges. There are reasons why we can't, make a larger budget than this. But if we all have an appreciation of what the issues are and commit to be part of the solution, perhaps in the years ahead, we can all then get the size of budget that we desire, which will ensure that every road that leads to our homes is built. Because truth is, it doesn't matter how many roads or how many thousands of kilometers of roads that you build, if someone's street hasn't been fixed, when you hear them talking, they'll say no road has been built in this town. And so today's event provides us an opportunity to engage. I'd like, if I take my seat, to remind us that of a principle that for me, it's quite, cardinal regarding the budget. The budget is not just a technical document. It's not just, a mass of numbers and data and whatever. The budget is a moral document. When you look at the budget of a country, by looking at the budget, it should tell you what and who that country values. And I hope that as you look at the budget that we have tried to make, it will be evident to you that there is a moral underpinning that budget, which is, the budget is a tool, an instrument towards building that, growing and more inclusive economy that we all, I believe, would like to see. On this note, it's my special honor and privilege to welcome you all to this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG Budget. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, before I invite the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, let me quickly give the following information. We want to recognize the fact that some people may be joining us online because this program is being beamed live, both in Nigeria and abroad. At the same time, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we know that for communication to be effective, there must be a sender, a receiver, an opportunity for feedback. That is when we can now say the communication is effective. Before I invite the Honorable Minister, let me quickly give this information once again. When we get to the question and answer section, please, when you are recognized to speak, you quickly introduce yourself and please straight to the question or your comments. Restrict your question or your comment to the issues to be addressed in the presentation of the Honorable Minister. We will not accept the use of vulgar language in the course of our contribution. We are good people of a great nation. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please remember to put your phones in the silent mode to enable us to have a robust interaction. At this point, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, they said it takes a very successful personality to lead very successful people. It is my pleasure to respectfully request the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning to please step forward to the podium and make your presentation. Honorable Minister, thank you.
Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me especially recognize my colleagues, the Honorable Ministers of Health and Information that are here today, and also the ministers that have joined us virtually, and also to recognize the Permanent Secretary, Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Accountant General of the Federation, the DG Budget of the Federation, DG DMO. We also have today the privilege of having the Senior Special Advisor to the President on National Assembly matters, House of Reps, and I understand he's representing his colleague, his Senate counterpart as well, and all the heads of agencies that are here, members of the diplomatic corps, members of the civil society, but a special welcome to our brothers and sisters, gentlemen of the press. Good morning. So today is another round of another opportunity that we have to interact with you and give you an overview of the fiscal outcomes, or be able to report to you on the performance of the economy in 2021, give you an update of the 2021 budget performance, and also go through very quickly the global outlook and domestic developments, and discuss with you the underlying macroeconomic assumptions, parameters, and targets for the 2022 budget, as well as give you an overview of the revenue, the expenditure, and the deficit in the 2020 budget proposal. We'll also be showing you some of the critical sectors of the economy, the allocations we have made in the proposed budget. We'll also be presenting to you the strategic revenue growth initiatives that we have been undertaking that has helped us so far to ramp up revenue, and also that will help us to do even more in the area of revenue. And there is, at the end of the day, a selection of projects in the budget by sectors that we will be leaving with you. I do hope that you will visit the website of the ministry and the budget office later on, and actually download a copy of this report for your own review. You recall that yesterday, His Excellency the President laid the 2022 budget before the National Assembly. This tradition that has evolved underscores this administration's firm commitment to sustain the return to a predictable January to December fiscal year, as well as to enact annual finance acts to facilitate the implementation of the budget. So while yesterday what was presented was the federal government budget and the budgets, along with the budget of 63 government-owned enterprises, the finance bill work we are doing is not yet complete and will be completed within the month of October. Hopefully by November we can send that also to the National Assembly. You also remember that during the course of the year, we had to prepare a supplementary budget, which was costed at 982.73 billion. It was passed by the National Assembly on the 7th of July, and Mr. President assented to it, bringing the total appropriation for the 2021 budget to 14.57 trillion. That budget that we did, the supplementary budget, was necessary because we needed to make sure as a nation we have more resources to spend on security and on health. And on health specifically, we made provisions, additional provisions for the purchase of COVID-19 vaccines, as well as the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines across the country. The Nigerian economy, we all remember, lapsed into recession in the third quarter of 2020 after 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, but promptly emerged from recession within 1 quarter by the 4th quarter of 2021. The economy since then has sustained the recovery with the Q1 year-on-year GDP growth of 0.51%, as well as the 2nd quarter GDP report of 5.01%. This recovery was fueled by implementation of government's economic sustainability plan, and also the full funding of the 2020 budget, and it helped to ease the COVID-19 induced restrictions on economic activities. The growth was mainly driven by the non-oil sector, and that's the good story, which rose by 6.71%, masking the deterioration of the oil sector, which was measured at minus 12.65%. Other non-oil sector performance include trade at 22.5%, water supply and waste management at 18.5%, ICT at 5.5%, human and health services at 4.9% growth rates. The persistent rise of inflation was halted in April 2021 after 19 consecutive months, from a high of 18.17% in March 2021. The consumer index, which measures inflation, moderated for the fourth consecutive month to 17.01% in August 2021. With this downward trend, which is expected to continue throughout the year, we should be closing 2021 at a much healthier inflation rate. We do still have high unemployment rates, and these high unemployment rates have implications for poverty incidence in the population. The NBS fourth quarter 2020 estimates put unemployment at the rate of 33% and underemployment at 22.84%. So now, to give you an overview of the 2021 fiscal outcomes, an update on the 2020 budget implementation. Sorry, this is 2021 budget implementation. The 2021 budget parameters, if you recall, include, so I'm on slide 8 now, include an oil price benchmark, which was passed in the budget at $40 per barrel, but the actual over the course of the year up to August average is $65 per barrel. Oil production was passed at 1.86 million barrels per day. The average today is 1.57 million barrels per day. Exchange rate was 379 naira to the US dollar. The current exchange rate is 410, the NAFEX rate that is 410.15 naira per dollar. Inflation was projected to close at 11.97%, but we are currently at 17.01%. Growth rate was projected to be 3.0%. We're projecting a growth rate of 5.01% for the close of 2021. So the fiscal numbers that we're going to report today are preliminary, and they will be updated as reconciliations are done on a monthly basis, and the reconciliation is ongoing until the year closes. As at the end of August 2021, federal government's retained revenue was 3.93 trillion naira. This represents 73% of the target. That is the prorated revenue target as at the end of August, not for the full year. Federal government share of all revenue was 754.20 billion. This represents 56.3% performance of the prorated target as at August 2021, while non-oil tax revenues totaling 1.15 trillion represents 115% over and above the prorated target. Companies' income tax and value-added tax collections were 547.54 billion and 235.77 billion, respectively, representing 121% in the case of CIT and 148% in the case of VIT. And this is of the prorated targets. Customs collections at 338.66 billion represents 99% of the prorated target. Other revenues amounting to 1.71 trillion, of which the federal government independent revenue of 691.36 billion, while government-owned enterprises revenues was 873.52 billion. So the story here is that the revenue performance aggregate is 73%, but the fact is the non-oil revenue is performing very well above targets, while the oil and gas sector revenue is the one that is lagging behind. So slide 10 just shows you more granular numbers of the summary that I just gave. And then at slide 11 is an update on the expenditure performance of the 2021 budget as at August 2021. On the expenditure side, 8.14 trillion, representing 84%, has been utilized And out of this amount, 9.71 out of the 9.71 trillion, that is the prorated expenditure from January to August. And this means 84% of the prorated target is the performance. This performance includes expenditure estimates of the government-owned enterprises, but this does not include project-tied loan numbers. Of the expenditure, 2.87 trillion was utilized for debt service, while 2.57 trillion was utilized for personnel costs, including pensions and gratuities. As at the end of August, 1.75 trillion naira had been expended for capital projects. Of this amount, 1.723 trillion represents 81% of the aggregate provision for MDA's capital prorated, while 36.01 billion is expenditure from government-owned enterprises. So slide 12 shows you more granular details of this performance. At slide 13 is some information that we have on the fiscal deficit financing. So you will see that we have a fiscal deficit of 4.299 trillion. This is against the prorated target of 4.610%. Sorry, 4.610 trillion. And how did we finance this deficit? This financing was done by utilization of 136.77 billion from proceeds of the sales of government assets through the privatization process, also by drawdown of multilateral and bilateral tied loans in the sum of 473.12 billion, and new borrowings of 3.659 trillion from both domestic and foreign sources. So let me now give you an update on the global outlook and domestic developments. Globally, the economy is projected to grow by 6.0% in 2021 and then down to 4.9% in 2022. In the euro area, growth is projected to be 4.6% in 2021. The recovery in the euro area is anticipated to be driven by pent-up demand and higher household incomes. China's economy is projected to tick up by 8.1% by the end of this year, and then goes down to 5.7% in 2020. So the global trend is growth is ramped up in 2021 and it goes down in 2022. And the reason being, all the fiscal measures that were taken in 2020 and 2021 has pushed up growth very significantly, but that base effect wears out in 2021 and it normalizes in 2022. Nigeria's picture is the same. Africa, on the other hand, is going to be growing at a projected rate of 5.3% by 2022. Egypt, by the way, had a growth rate of 3.6% in the year 2020. And this is owing to very high domestic consumption. This is a picture that can also be the story of Nigeria, because we have similar large numbers of population. It means we have enough numbers to actually drive consumption and drive the growth of the economy, even by internal consumption processes. Economic activities in sub-Saharan Africa region are expected to pick up in 2021 and 2022, although not at the same rate. GDP is projected to expand by 3.4% in 2021, and in the case of Africa, is going up, unlike the rest of the world, to 4.1% in 2022. South Africa is expected to recover from recovery. They have currently a decline and a recession rate of 7.0%, as a minus 7.0%. They are expected to grow to 4.0% in 2021 and 2.2% in 2022. Nigeria's economy posted a 5.01% GDP growth year-on-year in the second quarter of 2021, signaling a rebound of growth in economic activities. The non-oil sector is a significant contributor to the economic performance in that second quarter, with a growth rate of 6.74%. The IMF has reviewed upwards Nigeria's GDP growth forecast to 2.5% and 2.6% in 2021 to 2022, respectively. On the 2022 budget, the IMF expects that during the course of the year 2022, the IMF expects that advanced economies will rebound from the 4.6% growth rate in the pandemic period, and then up to 5.6% in 2021 and 4.4% in 2022. Low-income developing countries' GDP is projected to accelerate by 3.7% in 2021 and then up to 4.9% in 2022. These projections indicate global economic recovery from COVID-19 induced contraction in 2021. Growth is expected to now moderate in 2022. So the underlying macroeconomic assumptions and parameters and targets that we had set for the 2022 budget proposal is showing on slide 18. The oil price benchmark that we have used for 2022 budget was $40, and 2021 was $40 per barrel, and at 2022 we're projecting $57 per barrel. The oil production we're projecting for 2022 is 1.88 million barrels per day, an exchange rate of 410 naira 15 kobo to the US dollar, an inflation rate of 13%, a non-oil GDP of 169.697 trillion naira, with an oil GDP of 14.684 trillion naira. The GDP growth rate that is projected for 2022 is 4.2%. This is against the IMF projection of 2.5%. And then the imports that we're projecting for 2022 will grow from 30 trillion to 33.118 trillion, while nominal consumption will also grow from 136.56 trillion to 149.39 trillion. The outer years follow the same pattern. The key assumptions and the basic framework is based on a number of research as well as consultations that we have had to conduct. So consumption is projected to surge in the medium term, growing from a revised rate of 139 trillion to 149 trillion in 2022, about 9.38% increase. This growth momentum is projected to be sustained, reaching 179.6 trillion in 2024. Nominal GDP is expected to rise from 168.6 trillion in 2021 to 184.38 trillion, and then up to 221.78 trillion in 2024. Real GDP forecast is 4.2% in 2022. Inflation is expected to remain above single digit in the medium-term horizon, given the structural issues impacting costs of doing business, including high food distribution cost. The steady decline is, however, expected to be sustained, seeing inflation dropping to 13% in 2022 and then down to 10% in 2024. So at slide 20, although Nigeria's total production capacity is 2.5 million barrels per day, crude production is about 1.4 million barrels per day. And this is slightly short of the OPEC quota that has been assigned to Nigeria. But we do also have an additional 300,000 barrels per day of condensate, bringing the total to 1.7 million barrels per day. Oil production is projected to average 1.88 million barrels per day, this including condensates for 2022. The EIA expects that global oil production will increase to match the rising levels of global oil consumption. OPEC production is projected to average 28.3 million barrels per day in 2022, higher than the 26.94 million barrels per day in 2021, which means that we are hoping to get a higher OPEC quota from the current 1.4 million barrels per day that we have in 2022. World Bank forecasts that crude oil prices will rise gradually from an average of $60 per barrel in 2022 to $61 per barrel in 2023, and then up again to 61.9 US dollars per barrel in 2024. EIA sees 2022 oil prices averaging $66.05 dollars per barrel. So I've heard from yesterday that $57 per barrel is very pessimistic, but we are trying to be conservative, because we do have challenges in oil production, and also the market itself is very highly volatile and unpredictable. So the realities of 2021 portend sustained OPEC supply cuts. There will be cuts. Maybe we do hope to get a slightly larger number. Ongoing vaccination and rebounding of global GDP led by emerging economies. In consultation with the NNPC and other stakeholders, our base oil scenario in the medium term is still $57 per barrel. And this is premised on the averages of leading forecasting institutions, factors affecting market fundamentals, global economic recovery, plans by governments, as well as market sentiments. At slide 23 is the 2022 budget overview of revenue and expenditure, as well as the deficit financing. So the next slide, which is slide 23, is to give you the rationale for the revision of the 2022 to 2024 MTF. If you recall, the President had to send to the National Assembly early last week a request for the amendment of the MTF, because the underlying drivers of the 2022 fiscal projections, such as oil price benchmark, oil production, exchange rate, GDP, and inflation, remain unchanged in the previous MTF. However, there has been some key changes in the medium-term fiscal framework. The revision was necessitated by the need to reflect the new fiscal terms in the Petroleum Industry Act, the PIA of 2021, as well as other critical expenditures in the 2022 budget that were not anticipated at the time that we submitted the MTF in July. The fiscal effects of the PIA implementation are assumed to kick in by the middle of next year, 2022. So the revised 2022 to 2024 fiscal framework is premised on this hybrid approach, that the status quo remains in terms of oil revenue from January to June based on the current fiscal terms, and from July to December, the terms will change to the new PIA fiscal regime, while 2023 and 2024 will now be based on the new PIA fiscal regime. The key impacts of these changes are as follows. First of all, the gross federation revenue projection has decreased by 341.57 billion from 8.87 trillion to 8.528 trillion. Deductions for federally funded upstream project costs and 13% derivation have also decreased by 33.3 billion and 810.25 billion respectively. Net federation oil and gas revenue projections has thus declined by an aggregate of 5.42 billion. So it is marginal from 6.54 trillion to 6.535 trillion. Despite the decline in federation account revenue, the federal government's retained revenue is projected to increase from 8.3 trillion to 10.3 trillion. And I must go back to say that the decline in the revenue is as a result of the improved fiscal terms which is designed to attract more investments in the oil and gas sector. The impact of it is government's revenue is slightly reduced, but the expectation we're having and the indications will be so that more investors will come into the Nigerian market because the fiscal regimes are now quite competitive and attractive compared to our comparator countries. So a projected increase in the retained revenues of government enterprises accounts for 837.76 billion. MDA's internally generated revenue has 6.976 billion that is being expected to be realized. We also introduced in the budget the education tax of 306 billion, which previously was not being indicated as federal government revenue, but we're now showing it as a federal government revenue. And when we go to the expenditure side, you will also see it as a transfer. So it's a pass-through. But what it's doing is actually recognizing the revenues of government. And the dividend of 8.3 billion from the Bank of Industry is also being updated in the MTEF as an additional revenue line. The federal government share of oil royalty of 96.9 billion is expected to be transferred to the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, the NSIA, based on the provisions of the PIA. So we're recognizing this also as revenue, but we'll also recognize it as a transfer out to the NSIA as a requirement of the PIA. So summary for me here is that we have realized incremental revenues of about 1.6 trillion that is incorporated in the amended MTEF, and these revenue lines are not coming from the oil and gas sector. They're from the government-owned enterprises, from IGR, as well as from education tax and dividends from Bank of Industry. The rationale for the revision of the 2022 MTEF also had some inputs that we needed to adjust on the expenditure side. The increase on the expenditure side was motivated by the need to provide for additional critical expenditure, as well as to present a more comprehensive federal government of Nigeria budget. Some of these provisions that were recommended in the MTEF and passed by the National Assembly include 100 billion additional provision for INEC towards advanced preparations for the 2022 general elections. Previously, we had provided 40 billion, which was a normal run rate for INEC, but for the elections, the expenditure is much higher than that. We also provided a 40 billion for the National Poverty Reduction and Growth Strategy. This is a strategy that has been launched by Mr. President, and Mr. President has set up a special committee for implementation. This strategy has a major component of it, the upscaling of the existing social investment programs that are running and working well. We also introduced 178.10 billion provisions for population and housing census. The President has approved the conduct of the 2022 national census, and a proclamation will be made by Mr. President subsequently in this regard. We also recommended an additional 50 billion to be provided for police operations nationwide, 37 billion additional provision for MDA's electricity debts, 517.5 billion for multilateral, bilateral project-tied loans, as well as 54 billion to NASANI, which represents 1% federal government share of the Federation account. This is a provision that is required by the NASANI Act, and it has never been implemented. This is the first time we're doing it, and this is the recognition that science, technology, and innovation has become not only vital but urgent for us to give special attention to in the country. 305.99 billion has been provided for TED Fund. That is the outflow that I discussed, that I presented earlier on. The projected aggregate revenue available to fund the 2022 budget is 10.13 trillion. And this is inclusive of government-owned enterprises revenues. This revenue is 24.8% higher than the 2021 projection of 8.12 trillion. Without the government-owned enterprises revenue, the FGN revenue will be 8.4 trillion. To promote fiscal transparency, accountability, and comprehensiveness, allocations to TED Fund and the budget of 63 government-owned enterprises are integrated into the 2022 Federal Government of Nigeria budget proposals. In aggregate, 34.9% of the projected revenues is to come from oil-related sources, while 65.1% is to be earned from non-oil sources. This puts the picture of the determination and the commitment of Mr. President and this administration of diversifying our economy from dependence in the oil and gas. And this is also further reinforced by the fact that when you look at the last GDP report, the contribution of the oil sector is just 7.4%. So the Nigerian economy is truly diversified. What we need to do is to deepen that diversification and also ensure that the growth that we hope to that we're aspiring to is inclusive. At slide 26 is a table that just shows you an overview of the revenue framework that I have just discussed. At slide 29 is further information on the aggregate expenditure that is proposed in the 2022 budget framework. The 2022 federal government expenditure, inclusive of government-owned enterprises, project-tied loans, is projected to be 16.39 trillion naira. This is 12.5% higher than the 2021 budget. Recurrent non-debt spending is estimated to be 6.83 trillion, and this is 41.7% of the total expenditure of government and 18.5% higher than what was passed in the 2021 appropriation. The aggregate capital expenditure of 5.35 trillion is 32.7% of the total expenditure. So this is to let me just emphasize that we had made a commitment from 2016 when the ERGP was passed that federal government expenditure will be a minimum, capital expenditure will be a minimum of 30%. So the past 2 years, we have not been able to reach that mark, so we're able to attain that 30% plus at 32.7% in 2022 budget. This provision is inclusive of capital component of statutory transfers, as well as government-owned capital and project-tied loan expenditures, which are loans for specific major ongoing projects in the country. At 3.61 trillion, debt service is 22% of the total expenditure of government in the proposed budget, and 35.6% of the total revenue in the budget. Provisions that have been made to retire maturing bonds to local contractors and suppliers at 292.7 billion is 1.79% of the total expenditure. This provision is in line with the federal government's commitment to offset accumulated arrears of contractual obligations dating back to over a decade. So we've been doing this consistently but gradually. At slide 31 is an overview of the deficit financing as well as some of the critical ratios in the 2022 budget proposal. The overall budget deficit is 6.26 trillion naira for the year 2022. This represents 3.39% of the gross domestic product. Budget deficit is to be financed mainly by borrowings, domestic and foreign, at the rate of 2.5 trillion each, multilateral bilateral loan drawdowns, which we project to be 1.16 trillion. So these are loans that have already been committed to and projects are ongoing, and privatization proceeds of 90.7 billion. So it is interesting to just again emphasize that the total capital expenditure performance percentage is 33%, 33% of the total size of the budget, and that the deficit is at 3.3%, 3.39% of the GDP. Speaking about debt, we have had to resort to borrowing to finance our fiscal gaps. However, we believe that the debt level of the federal government of Nigeria today is still within sustainable limits. Borrowings are essential for us to be able to continue to deploy necessary capital expenditure as well as invest in human development. When you look at the Fiscal Responsibility Act, Section 41.1 of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, it is clearly provided for that the country can borrow for investing in capital expenditure and human capital development as long as the borrowing does not exceed 3.3% of GDP. This year, we have exceeded the 3% by 0.39%, and this also has been allowed in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, a provision that says that Mr. President can exceed the 3% threshold where there is a national emergency. And it is our collective view that the current security situation that we have, the need to properly address the economic conditions occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic and the crash of crude oil price qualify as national emergency. Having witnessed 2 consecutive recessions, we have had to spend our way out of recession, which contributed significantly to the growth of our public debt. It is unlikely that our recovery from each of these 2 recessions will have been fast without the sustained government expenditure funded partly by debt. To compound matters, the country has technically been at a situation where we have had several security challenges. With the pervasive security challenges across the country, there's a need for sustained funding of the security services. This has necessitated massive expenditures in security equipment as well as security operations, and this has contributed again to the fiscal deficit that we have. Defense and the security sector accounts for 22% of the budget expenditure for 2022. Nigeria's budget deficit is at minus 4.7% in 2021, and the debt to GDP ratios of 21.6% are the lowest amongst Nigeria's comparator countries. However, Nigeria's debt service to revenue ratio at 73%, this is actual, as at August, is the highest among African countries. And this, for us, is the concern. So the concern for us is that we have a revenue challenge that we all need to continuously address. The proof is that we don't have what a debt sustainability problem. The problem that we have is actually a revenue problem, and that's what we're working to address. Tax rates and compliance ratios are significantly higher in these countries that we're normally compared to. For example, Nigeria's VAT rate at 7.5% is the lowest in Africa, less than 50% of the African average. The slide at number 34, I don't know if you can read it, but the bar chart on the left-hand side shows the total debt to GDP levels of Nigeria, which is the first one at 21.6%. When you compare us to Angola, Angola is at 127.1%. Egypt is at 19% of their GDP. Ghana is at 73%. South Africa is at 77.1%. Kenya is at 68%, Senegal at 65%. So just to make the point that Nigeria's debt levels are low, they're sustainable, that the problem we have is a revenue problem. At slide 35, it is critical now for us, even in this forum, to discuss how to fix our revenue challenges, because cutting expenditure currently is not a viable option, as our public expenditure to GDP ratio is again one of the lowest in the African leading economies. We must, however, continue to rationalize expenditure as we cannot afford any wastages. In reality, the largest expenditure items are currently personnel, debt service, as well as capital expenditure. Between these three, when you put them together, is 85% of total federal government expenditure in the 2022 budget. There's very little scope to cut in any of this over the medium term period. So what we must do is to increase the revenues. The most viable solution to our fiscal challenges, therefore, remains for us to grow our revenues and block leakages. Our target over the medium term is to grow our revenue to GDP ratio, which is currently at 8 to 9% of GDP. We must grow it to 15% by the year 2025. At the current level of revenues, the debt service to revenue ratio, if we reach this 15%, will cease to be of any critical concern for the country. In January 2019, the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning launched the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative. This is an initiative that had major initiatives that were designed to ensure that we meet and limit our fiscal gaps. The systematic resource mobilization problem has been compounded by a recent economic recession. So while we had started to progress, 2020 incidents of COVID-19 had seen us stepping back, but we have now moved back to the pre-pandemic levels. Several measures were being instituted under the administration's Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative to improve government revenue, to entrench fiscal prudence with emphasis on achieving value for money. These measures include the improving tax administration framework, including tax filing and payment compliance improvements. Other measures include the evaluation of the processes and policy effectiveness of fiscal incentives. This includes review of sectors that are eligible for things like pioneer certificates, incentives under the Industrial Development Income Tax Relief, EDITRA. We also worked on dimensioning the cost of tax waivers, concessions, and evaluating their policy effectiveness, and we're looking at what to scale back on and cut back on to preserve revenue. We're also setting annual ceilings on tax expenditures to better manage their impact on already constrained government revenues. We're working to ensure that MDAs appropriately account for and remit their internally generated revenues. Other measures that are encapsulated in the SRGI include identifying and plugging existing revenue leakages to enhance compliance and reduce tax evasion, leveraging technology and automation, plucking fiscal drainers like subsidies. To further enhance independent revenue collection, government aims to optimize the operational efficiencies and revenue generation focus of the government-owned enterprises. The introduction of new and further increases in existing pro-health taxes, for example, excise duties on carbonated drinks. This is work in progress, but it will happen in the 2021 Finance Act. Government's revenue performance and remittances will become enhanced through the effective implementation of the performance management framework, including possible sanctions should there be defaults on targets that are set for government-owned enterprises. Tighter expenditure control include the enforcement of the Finance Act provision. The Finance Act 2020 made a provision limiting government-owned enterprises' expenditure to revenue ratio at 50. That is to say, these agencies cannot spend more than 50% of what they generate. And that's one major revenue that will be coming into the government treasury. Regular independent monitoring and reporting of revenue and expenditure performances by both the Budget Office of the Federation as well as the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation. The Finance Bill 2021 will contain measures that will further advance the implementation of the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative, the SRGI. At slide 41 is to show the revenue improvements that we have witnessed from 2017 to 2021 in terms of independent revenues. That is revenues from government-owned enterprises. The trend you can see is an upward one, and the values are indicated. They are too small even for me to see from here, but the trend is an upward trend and is a very positive one. The trend in the graph shows a steady improvement of our independent revenues over the years. As at August 2021, we have surpassed all the collection targets for federal government independent revenues from 2017 to date. This reflects the performance of our revenue growth initiatives to this particular revenue stream. At the current rate, we are now firmly in a position to surpass the 1 trillion naira mark collection from independent revenue sources. Analysts have always considered our projections to be unrealistic, but we have always insisted on the potentials that exist to grow federal government independent revenue, and this is fact. So the reality is showing that we have indicated. Next is to present to you some allocations in the 2022 budget relating to some critical sectors. So first of all, the education sector at slide 43 is receiving 1.290 trillion. This is 7.9% of the total budget. And this includes 875.93 billion, which is provided for the ministry and its agencies. This is their capital and recurrent expenditure. 108 billion provided for Universal Basic Education Commission, UBEC, as well as 306 billion for TET Fund. For the health sector, I'm glad the Honorable Minister of Health is here, so if you have any questions, it's to the Minister. We made a provision of 711.28 billion naira. This is for the ministry, its agencies, capital and recurrent, including hazard allowances for the medical personnel. We also provided 54.87 billion for Gavi immunization funds, including counterpart funding for donor-supported programs, including Global Fund. We also provided 54.05 billion transfer to the Basic Healthcare Provision Fund. So the Basic Healthcare Provision Fund has been on statutory transfer since 2020, which means it's on autopilot. They get the 1% of the CRF. Other critical sectors include defense and security, 2.41 trillion. This is 15% of the national budget. And this amount has been provided for the military, police, intelligence services, as well as paramilitary services. This is both their capital and recurrent. We also made provisions of 1.451 trillion for infrastructure, 9%, and this includes for power works and housing, transport. The development sector got a provision of 863 billion. This represents 5.3% of the budget. This amount is provided for the social investment program, as well as the new National Poverty Reduction and Growth Strategy program. So to round up, the 2022 budget is expected to further accelerate the growth of the Nigerian economy. We're optimistic that attaining more inclusive growth as we focus on achieving our objectives of mass job creation and lifting millions of citizens out of poverty. Early passage of the 2022 bill for implementation by 1st of January will significantly contribute towards achieving government macro-fiscal and sectoral objectives. However, revenue currently remains our main fiscal challenge, and we're putting all efforts to make sure that the strategic revenue growth initiative targets are met. In addition to the SRGR, we are also leveraging on technology, automation, plugging fiscal drainers, and ensuring more effective independent revenue monitoring. Efforts are also being made at addressing revenue leakages. Other efforts include the ongoing implementation of the IPPIS, the dimension of cost of tax waivers, and promoting policy dialogue and transparency around tax waivers. Also, elimination of regressive subsidies such as the fuel subsidy and electricity tariffs, the cost-to-income ratio capping of the government-owned enterprises, I earlier said, is 50-50 expenditure to revenue. Achieving government's budget objectives require collective, bold, decisive, and urgent actions, and government is determined to continue to push the bar. However, government remains mindful of the need to provide safety nets to cushion the impact of reforms on vulnerable segments of our population. The goal of fiscal interventions will be to keep the economy active through carefully calibrated regulatory policy measures designed to boost domestic value addition, to de-risk enterprise environments, to attract external investments, and also to widen our sources of funding. A list of some of the key projects included in the 2022 budget, apart from the earlier ones I've presented, are also attached as an appendix to this presentation. So the purpose of this forum is for us to harness citizens' participation and feedback in enhancing budget for 2022, but also to remind you that we do have on the website of the Budget Office an iMonitor, as well as a citizen budget monitoring app available on the website that you can also download on your phone and be able to interact on performance of government projects. Key projects in the 2022 budget are presented again in this report as an appendix. Details of the executive proposal will be available on the website of the Budget Office as well as the website of the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. So I will want to ask the presenters to continue to show the appendixes. If you go to the appendix, you will see slide 53, aviation, rail, power, housing, industry, trade and investment, Niger Delta, health, continued social investment, regional investment, works, so we have roads, bridges, education, you see some of the major projects, water resources, some of the major projects, education and others. So on this note, I want to say thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning. They said the secret of success is constancy of purpose. To me, it was well delivered. Let's just give the Honorable Minister another round of applause, please. As we go into this very important segment of this public presentation, let me quickly recognize the presence of the following dignitaries in our midst. We have with us the Chairman, Federal Inland Revenue Services, Mr. Mohammed Nami. I welcome you, sir. Thank you so much. We equally have with us the Permanent Secretary of Finance, Federal Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Malam Ali Ahmed. I welcome you, sir. Thank you so much. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this segment is very, very important in the course of the Minister's presentation. I laid the rules when we started. When you are recognized to speak, please introduce yourself quickly. Restrict your question or your comments to the issues addressed in the presentation of the Honorable Minister. Please straight to the point. We will not accept the use of vulgar language. It is not acceptable at this forum. I want to thank you so much for your anticipatory cooperation. At this point, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I want to declare the floor open for your questions and comments. I don't know whether from the high table we have questions. Because the Honorable Minister was saying, the Honorable Minister of Health is there. If he has any problem, possibly it can be addressed. But at this point, I want to throw it open this way. Yes, sir. Let's have you. Any other person? Okay. From this angle, okay. Let's just take 3 headlong questions. The Honorable Minister will now respond. Then we'll just take it like that, so that we can have, will not lose focus and just go straight.
Very much. Honorable Minister of Finance, good morning. I'm Victor Abai, and I am reporting for Bishop published by the Catholic Church. I just want to know, being a non-economist, what is attractive in borrowing to finance the budget and the economy? That is one. 2, you said that on debt servicing, we are spending 3.6 trillion naira for debt servicing, which is 35.6% of total revenue. Don't you think that is too high? Thank you.
Let's take you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Engineer Awal Ibrahim Bunu. I'm the Technical Advisor of Miners Association of Nigeria. I want to talk on the strategic revenue growth initiatives of government. I want to suggest that the major key to achieve this strategic growth is trade and industrial development. That is the cake-baking mechanism that will promote these strategic revenue growth initiatives. But I would like to call on the public sector to engage more with the private sector on some policy implementations of government to be able to realize these growth, strategic growth initiatives. For example, the public procurement policies. There are a lot of executive orders have been enacted by government on public procurement and local content policies, but the organized private sector are not being engaged closely. If we can have a mechanism and platforms of engagement with government on the implementation of some public procurement policy and local content policy, we will be able to develop our trade and industries, local trade and industries, and be able to generate more revenue for government. That is the only way. For example, Nigeria has developed strategic document on economic sustainability plan, which has a lot of strategies for economic diversification, poverty alleviation, sustainable job creation, and a lot of you. We are talking on African continental free trade area. We are undergoing negotiations, and there are a lot of opportunities also to diversify our revenue through that. We are negotiating trade with world trade organizations, whereby we are making trade facilitation and negotiation on how to integrate Nigeria into international trade value chain. And there are a lot of opportunities coming up by the Africa Economic Forum developed by developed countries in the world like Russia, China, Japan. They have a lot of Africa Economic Forum whereby there are a lot of opportunities for trade and industrial development. But because the initial seed capital required to build the capacity of our Nigerian trade and industrial development capacity is not built, so I want to use the public procurement policy and local content policies. The government should now bring up a platform whereby it will engage more with the organized private sector on these 2 key issues, so that we can now develop the capacity of our local trade and industrial development for us to be able to achieve the strategic growth in revenue generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll take one more. Let's take from this side, please.
Okay. That's my
Hello.
The man in the suit, please. The man in the suit with black.
Myself?
Hello. Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Engineer Induka from Jodo Asset Management. Sincerely, some of these figures don't add up, and we have a lot of challenges. If you look at one of the slides, our focus was on the oil price benchmark at $40 per barrel. Another focus was on oil production at 1.86 million barrels per day. We put the exchange rate at $3.79 per dollar, inflation expectation at 11.95%, growth rate at 3%, OPEC production rate steady at 28.34 million barrels per day. We don't have control over most of all this. We don't have control over our oil production. We don't have control over our exchange rate. We don't have control over our inflation measure. We really don't have control over our growth rate. I think our focus has to do with our revenue and how much we plan, how we price our oil. If we don't price our oil at a rate where we can generate sustainable revenue from our oil flows, we will not be able to sustain or grow any of our projects in this land. The main issue we have that I have seen from this is the price of oil is dictated by two forces, the US Western Texas Intermediate and the UK Brent market. We need to find a way where we price our oil either under the OPEC regime or either under an African trade regime where that dictates the amount of revenue we generate from oil sources. And there's again another statement that was made by the Honorable Minister which says our economy is getting well diversified. I really don't think so, because if you look at the amount of revenue we generate from non-oil sources, if we take our import duty for instance, we don't generate enough revenue from non-oil sources. We are still dependent and highly dependent on our oil revenue. In that regard, we need to focus on the pricing strategy for the oil market. And not just the oil market, the entire agricultural, metals, mining, metallurgy, and also the power sector. If we don't generate a pricing strategy there, we cannot generate revenue to grow our economy. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister may wish to give a response to the first three questions. Thank you, Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you very much again, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today, for listening to us, and for the feedback that you're providing. So first of all, the question from the gentleman from the Catholic Church that says, what is attractive about borrowing? Nobody said borrowing is attractive. You borrow only when you're compelled to. When you don't have enough revenue and you aspire to grow, especially grow your infrastructure stock, and also bridge your human capacity gap, it's either you don't do it or you borrow to do it. The thing to do is to make sure you borrow on a basis that is sustainable. We have a debt management strategy that is completely designed for a medium time period to track how we borrow, the sources in which we borrow, the rates, the tenors, and even the conditions for those borrowing. The debt management strategy was approved, the revised one was approved this year, and we're borrowing largely from the domestic market, but also from concessionary sources in the international market, and in some cases, we borrow also from the international capital market. So it's either you don't borrow and don't build the roads and bridges and rail now until you raise enough revenue, and you allow your health and education sectors to continue to deteriorate, or you borrow now and do these things now. These things that you're investing in, they actually add up. They add up in the sense that with consistent investment, you find the economy growing and also consumption increasing, and revenues now coming to the government as a result of incremental taxes, and also increased productivity because people have better quality of life. Awal Ibrahim said a lot about the SRGI, and your suggestion is that we should also focus on trade and industry. It's a good suggestion. We work very closely with our trade and industry counterparts, but this SRGI was designed to focus on revenue, but I hear you. We will reach out to, we already work together with the trade authorities, especially in the area of the incentives that are provided for trade. We are currently in the process of reviewing them together. So we will work more closely together. And then also you said something about the opportunities that are bound as a result of the AFCFTA, how government should consult more to be able to help businesses through policies to take the most advantage from the AFCFTA. As far as I know, we have a national committee on the AFCFTA. Apart from the Ministry of Trade and Investment and Ministry of Finance that are members, the rest of the membership, about 12 organizations, are all private sector. So the AFCFTA ascension, the review and the negotiation of the terms are driven by the private sector, and we continue to work together to enhance the capacity, not only as government, but as businesses to take advantage of the opportunity that it presents. Again, we'll give feedback to the trade authorities on the matters that you have brought up. Engineer Nduka, you said some of the figures don't add up, but you still didn't say what didn't add up. Our numbers add up. What we are proposing here is crude oil price, which is, by the way, not determined by any oil producing country. The crude oil price is not something that you say, okay, this is my product and this is the price in which I sell it. The market is not like that. There's a international trading platform, and that determines how your product is sold. And then Nigeria is an oil-producing country, but there are oil-producing countries that produce up to more than 10 times what we produce in a day. So even in OPEC, we're actually not a large player. So the price of the product is not determined by us. If you're suggesting that African countries should come together and form a pressure group to determine prices, when you aggregate the African production, if you take out Saudi Arabia, it's still not, we're still not near what Saudi Arabia is. So we continue to just participate in these associations to make input in the process to be able to get the advantage or best advantage of the price. We're trying to see how we can get a higher level of production allowed numbers from the OPEC group, because that will now enhance our revenue. And it is not true that we're still dependent on oil revenue. Our revenues is largely non-oil. What is a fact is we're still dependent on foreign exchange from oil and gas sector. The oil and gas sector today still remains the largest earner of foreign exchange. So that is a challenge that we need to address. We're working to introduce more export products that would enhance our revenue earnings. And also with the deployment of the refineries, especially the Dangote one, it will reduce how much we're using our foreign exchange to buy PMS for local consumption. Do you want to add anything, did you, Bada? Honorable Minister?
Well, thank you, Honorable Minister. Again, just to underscore the point you made in response to the comment about what is attractive in borrowing. First, I think public debt has been demonized in these parts, sometimes for good reason, because maybe in the past debt may not have been efficiently utilized and all of that. But the reality is all countries borrow. All businesses, I mean, at least the big businesses, there's none that doesn't borrow. So borrowing per se is not the problem. It's what you do with the funds that you've borrowed, and it's also, managing what you're borrowing, and to be within your capacity to repay. But in our own particular case, the question that put to we say shouldn't borrow is what is the option in the immediate term? Take in for 2020, for instance, the initial 2020 budget envisaged new borrowings of 1.7 trillion naira, and COVID-19 happened. When COVID-19 happened, our revenues tanked. You couldn't stop paying people's salaries. You couldn't stop, providing. Indeed, your need to provide health care increased. We had to come up with a 500 billion naira COVID-19 intervention fund and all of that, at the time when, and the net effect was that the amount that you needed to borrow, if you shot up from 1.7 trillion naira to 5.6 trillion naira. What was the option? Say you're not going to borrow and close down the system. So it's important as we get this into, as I keep saying, our problem as a government in Nigeria is not that we're spending too much. Our problem indeed is that we're still spending too little. Our public expenditure ratio to our GDP is still way too low, and that's why people are not getting all of the services they expect to get from government. And why is that so? Simply because our revenues are also too low. So, we're putting the focus and dissipating energy, talking about really having the wrong discussion. But I have a theory that the right discussion is an inconvenient one for most people, which is the revenue, because the discussion about revenue, involves us. It reminds me of the story about, the chicken and the pig about breakfast. If you are going to have egg for breakfast, the chicken can lay the egg. His life is not involved. He doesn't, so he can very gladly have a discussion about eggs for breakfast. If you're going to have bacon, the pig's life has to. So the pig isn't enthusiastic in having a discussion about bacon for breakfast. So, but if you're going to have breakfast, everybody has to be involved. The reality, as the minister said, for instance, look at VAT, see how low. We all have to, up to the fact that, the option may entail that we pay a lot more taxes than, just as happens in other parts. Our tax to GDP ratio is the lowest. There's no other way countries fund, public expenditure. Taxation is the principal way that we're paying too low taxes, and we're demanding, a lot in terms of public expenditure. So government's option is either not to provide, or in the interim, to borrow to provide while taking action to shore up, the revenues. Because, for instance, we insist that we must pay a low price for petrol. That's costing a lot. If we got rid of that, there will be, more money that you don't have to borrow to listen. So these are the discussions we must have, not just saying you're borrowing too much. Let's have a discussion around what else should you do. So, like the gentleman who made this comment, tell us what the options should be to borrowing. How do we fund this? So that's what I just thought I should, underscore. Thank you.
Let me invite the chairman FRS to speak to the current tax base that we have, and then our tax rates, including VAT, compared to countries that are our peers, and other information that he may want to add. Chairman FRS.
Thank you. Mine is just a quick one to address the issue of Nigeria not diversifying its economy. From tax perspective, and from the figures we shared with the public last year, and if we are to be specific about what we are currently doing, you will discover that we're actually diversifying. One, the total collection we have up to 30th September, which we are even yet to fully reconcile with CBN and the Nigeria Custom, is about 4.2 trillion naira. And from this amount, oil-related taxes accounted for only 22%, which is 950 billion naira only. The non-oil taxes we have generated in the period is 3.3 trillion naira. So I want to believe the diversification is on course. Secondly, to discuss about the taxes that have been paid in this country and to say whether they are adequate or not, I want to believe, one, they are not adequate. People are not even willing to pay, even where people are appointed as agent of collection. Whatever they have collected on behalf of government, they find it difficult to remit. Okay. Number two, when you compare Nigeria as an oil-producing country to the small country of Saudi Arabia, like the Honorable Minister rightly pointed out, we are still not there. We assume that we're a rich country. I don't think that is correct. We only have potentials to be rich because, one, we have very huge population, which is in the region of about 200 million people. In Saudi Arabia, you have a population of just above 10 million people. So when you compare these two, you know that we have an issue to discuss and to talk of how we solve our own problems. Number two, you look at it from the perspective of the rate of taxes paid. In Saudi Arabia, which is just a population of 10 million people, VAT rate is as high as 15%, and what we have in Nigeria is just 7.5%. Three, which followed us closely, is that the Saudi Arabia Aramco, which is our equivalent of the NNPC, now NNPC Limited, recorded $52 billion profit last year. We do not have that money as a country. Just a company owned by another country earning profit of 52 billion naira. So it will be $1 billion. We do not even have a budget of that size, not to talk of even competing with them, and they have just a population of just about 10 million people. So we need to do more. We have to make more sacrifice for this country, and the only way we can do it is through payment of taxes, particularly direct taxes, e.g. personal income tax. Thank you.
Chairman, what's the tax base today? What's the number of taxpayers?
Okay, let me even thank you, Honorable Minister, for reminding me to discuss that. Our total tax base today is in the region of about 41 million people, and the total personal income tax paid last year was less than 1 trillion naira by 40 million people. If you also compare that to our own brother, the South Africa, where we have a total population of just about 60 million people, with just 4 million people in the tax base, only 4 million. The total personal income tax paid in South Africa last year was about 13 trillion naira. So you can now see that these things are not adding up. The number of billionaires in Lagos alone are more than the total number of billionaires in the whole of South Africa. Yet, what we generated as personal income tax as at JTB level or by Lagos state government was just less than 400 billion naira. So if we don't pay these taxes, there is no way government will be able to provide the social amenities required, the critical infrastructure that the citizens require for the well-being of the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. let me say that we've been receiving messages, comments, questions from our participants online. But before we go to that, we'll just take another round of questions, please. Let me, okay. 1, 2 at the back. Do we have, our women are not, okay. 1, 2, then the man in suit. Let's have it for sir. Yo.
Comrade Issa Aremi MNI, and I'm the Director General of Michael Imodu Labour Institute in Ilorin. First, I would like to appreciate the detailed presentation of the Honorable Minister, and I want to commend her for promoting citizens' participation in budgetary process through, provision of abundance of data, as we have witnessed today. I also want to appreciate the policy thrust of the 2022 Appropriation Bill by not repressing expenditures. And I'm happy the DG of the Budget Office has also indicated is that it's important to make the point that Nigeria is underspending for now, and we need to find space for further spending so that we can get out of recession and, of course, move into recovery after COVID-19 pandemic. And, of course, the 3 critical elements in expenditures are also clear: the capital expenditure, the recurrent, of course, servicing of the debt. They are quite inevitable. We can't run away from them. So, Your Honourable Minister, I'm just interested on the new initiative which you brought to be now on the revenue growth initiatives. I think I just want to suggest that the Budget Office has to also do as much as possible to popularize these initiatives among the MDAs, because this is the way to go. We just have to make sure we grow our revenue. And the last note, I think I want the Honourable Minister or the DG of the Budget Office to throw more light on this cost-to-income cap, the 50% cost-to-income rate cap, which you have really brought into being. Because as somebody also is managing an MDA that is income generating, I have no doubt in my mind that there's a lot of incomes that we can really unlock, to the public revenue. Even though some of the agencies also need some funding before they could get there. But I want to suggest that need for a platform for engagement with MDAs to see as much as possible how we can get back into these revenue growth initiatives. Thank you very much.
Yeah. The second question, please.
Good morning. My name is Leah Katum Babatunde from NTA. Yesterday, the bulk of the feedback we got were questions around MDA's budgeting that are gender sensitive. So I would like if the minister or anyone on the table there can give us some specifics for the sake of our viewers, readers, and listeners. And also, there is a report by the World Bank recently, just last week, that puts youth population growth at 74%, with Nigeria having the largest chunk. So is our next year budget considering this issue of youth population explosion? Thank you.
My name is Emperor Simon, and I report for Channels Television. I'd like to specifically talk about the sectoral allocation to health and education. We know that the EU standard for annual budgeting for education is about 15%. We still have not been able to meet that. Secondly, health at a critical time when Nigeria, like many countries of the world, is faced with the life-threatening pandemic of COVID-19, we're still allocating far less or lesser than the 26% recommended by UNESCO. This is really a big concern for us. I don't know what explanation the Minister of Budget would give for this. Thank you.
Honorable Minister, I may wish to give a response. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this round of questions. First of all, to thank my brother, Comrade Issa Aremu. I'm sure the MC gave you an opportunity, not realizing that you're now a DG and part of government, because we're supposed to be giving the non-government participants an opportunity. But I get your point. You're saying that we should do more to popularize the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative. That's an excellent idea. We've been concentrating on working with the SRGI portfolio agencies, the agencies that have targets set in the SRGI to deliver, but we haven't taken it wider, so we will do that. That's an excellent idea. And also on the issue of the cost to income ratio, the Finance Act 2020 has made a provision that government-owned enterprises, these are enterprises that are not funded by the federal government budget. But these are enterprises that government has invested in. They are running businesses. Over time, we found that they were consuming most of what they were generating. So the provision that has been made in the Finance Act is that I want to add more on that. Question from Leah Katung NTA on the issue of, let me start first of all on the issue of the youth population. We have made a provision in line with the commitment that Mr. President made after the NSAS protest. There was a fund of 75 billion naira that was set up. We made, and he said it was supposed to be provided over a 3-year period. So for 2021, we provided 25 billion, and it is in the 2021 budget. And for 2022, we have made another provision. You'll find it in the service-wide for the Nigeria Youth Fund, also of 25 billion. On the issue of gender sensitivity, so what we have done is, during the call circular, encourage MDAs to, as they are making provisions for their programs and projects, to use a gender lens, to be asking ourselves, every program of government that we plan, how do we get more women involved, or how does the program even affect women? Because the needs for men and women are varied, and it is a fact that women have not had as much opportunities as our male counterpart. In most cases, of the cases, government programs are designed without considering how women can get involved. So for example, Ministry of Works of FEMA can design road projects to say that they must get road projects, construction workers from within the community. They can say that at least a certain percentage of those construction workers should also be women. Something like that is what we're trying to push for, to make a conscious effort to give more women at all levels, from the grassroots to all levels, an opportunity to be involved in productive activities. On the sectoral education, to the health and education sectors, what we presented is that the health sector is getting 5%, while the education sector is getting 7.5%. If you look at the health sector, from where we started in 2015, the health sector budget has increased almost 250%. So while AU might be in their country saying that you should provide 15%, reality is not that we cannot reach that overnight. If you look at our budget consistently, every year, there's significant increase in the education and the health budget. So it's a process, it's not an event. You don't just wake up one day and say, my budget will be 15% health or 25% education, because you also have security that you want to think about. You also have to think about deployment for infrastructure, and other social sectors of the economy. So it's not, the budget process doesn't work by you just cutting out a percentage, but you make an assessment of what is the practical need that you need to meet. And then remember also that you're only looking at the federal government's budget. Those numbers that the EU you're quoting, they are national numbers. So for you to get these numbers right, you have to do your homework, check the budgets of all the states of the Federation. And when you say the numbers are national, you also have to look at the health spend, also the health spend of the private sector practitioners. That will give you the correct picture of Nigeria's spend, whether it is in the health or the education sector. DG budget, oh, HM, do you want to add? Okay, DG budget, do you want to?
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Just the last point that you made to underscore it. And first, to take the opportunity to dispel this hard-to-die attribution to UNESCO. UNESCO has said severally, they've never specified any 26%. In fact, today I'm hearing for the first time that 26% for health. Usually they say UNESCO says 26% for education. UNESCO has made no such specification. You know, it's something that just comes up and people, whatever, say, you can Google, you know, just Google it, and you will see UNESCO statement, you know, denying this. However, again, as the Minister said, you know, these social sectors, education and health, the reality is that, you know, the subnational governments, because it's the aggregate for Nigeria's budget that you talk about, not the federal government's budget, are actually supposed to spend a bigger share of their budgets on those issues. Because the federal government has to deal with defense, national security, foreign affairs. There are things that, you know, the states don't spend money. Let me say something rather shocking, and you know, even me, I didn't realize that until, you know, not long ago, and it goes to the Honourable Minister of Health, of State for Health. The truth is, if you read Nigeria's constitution, health is not in the exclusive legislative list. It is not also in the concurrent legislative list, which by implication means it's in the residual list. Everything in the residual list means the Constitution envisages it is the responsibility of the states. And yet the federal government is currently spending more money on health than possibly all of the states combined. So these, you know, the advocacy about the need to allocate a greater share of our budgets to those social sectors, while the federal will continue to do its level best, I think that we all need to intensify that advocacy with our respective, you know, state and local governments. Now the federal government is having to step in to, you know, invest even in primary health care, which is the foundation of the healthcare system. Ordinarily, that shouldn't be, you know, the, you know, the case. I can cite the example of two states. I know one state, the total number of doctors employed by the state government, 25. One federal hospital in that state employs 300 doctors. I know another state, the total number of doctors employed by the state government, 40. One federal hospital in that same state employs 500 doctors. So, you know, we need to spend more on health. And as I said earlier, our problem as a country is not that we're spending too much, but we're not spending enough, especially in some of those critical areas. But the, you know, advocacy needs to go beyond, you know, the federal government, and don't take the ratio of the federal government's budget as basically, you know, the ratio of the expenditure of the budget. We're doing something now. There's no constitutional requirement to do a national budget for Nigeria. And some of the budgets you compare to in other countries, given their constitutional arrangements, are national budgets. But we're doing now, in the budget office, we're doing a national budget portal where we're trying to basically simulate a national budget. We're populating it now. We've got data for all the 36 states, budgets, for instance, for 2020. But the local governments can't find, it's only the 4 local councils in Abuja that we've been able to lay hands on their budgets. So now we're looking for a proxy for local governments, just take their FAC allocations as what they are spending. And we're looking to see how we can simulate their allocation of those. So we can actually then create a national, simulate a national budget and see what pattern of allocations we have to these critical sectors. Thank you.
Honorable Minister, before we take another round of questions, I want to kindly seek your permission to read some of the comments online on what we are doing here today. The first one is from Dr. Obina Onoha. He asked, how is the IMF SDR allocation of about $3.3 billion to Nigeria appropriated in the year 2022 budget? The second one is from Oluwaseun Magriola. She asked, why do we need to borrow all the time? Can't we run a surplus budget? We have another one from Joel Owuru from Augustine University. We know that deficit financing is not totally bad. Frankly, downsizing current, huge public debt hinges on insecurities. We have not, however, seen the impact in terms of reduced insecurities. Can't we be intentional in limiting our expenses to available revenue? The last one that we have, he said, again, I asked, with such projections in growth, in the non-oil revenue sector, do we need to be borrowing as much unless we don't believe our projection? Honorable, those are the ones we have online. We now quickly move into another round of questions. Possibly the Honorable Minister and her team would just the other ones we raised, or you want to respond to Honorable Minister, you may wish to give your response.
Okay, let's respond to the comments and questions that have come from online. First of all, the first one from Dr. Obina on the issue of IMF SDR. So we're take IMF SDR as part of the financing for the 2022 budget, the foreign financing. That would mean that we don't. But the SDRs are provided by the IMF to show up the foreign exchange positions of member countries. Possible to access it, we are to negotiate with the Central Bank of Nigeria of borrowing, but of course it will be borrowing that will be cost, so it will be lower. It will be, and it's already, the funds are already here available. It costs more than if we go outside to borrow. So we are going to use it as a financing item. The terms of the borrowing have not yet been conclusively negotiated with Central Bank, but it's going to be up for the 2022 external borrowing component. So secondly, I hope within the medium to early, let's that position where we run a balanced budget, a budget where you are generating enough on all of your expenses. That's the ideal. Germany used to run a balanced budget, but during the COVID-19, they had to also resort to borrow. So you borrow, somebody said earlier on, borrowing in itself is not a bad thing to do, as long as you're making sure you're borrowing on a sustainable basis and applying the funds that you borrow to expenditure items that are very important and that will themselves yield returns subsequently, either in the medium or in the medium to long-term future. So downsizing the size of government, yes, it's an option. But you also have to know that it's not something that you can do overnight, and it's not easy because it means disengaging people from work. The president has consistently said, make sure you pay salaries, make sure you pay pensions, because we don't want to create more crisis within the polity. So when you have people employed by government and they're working and you're paying them, it's putting money into the hands of people or sustaining some level of consumption. So if you disengage a person, it's not one person you're affecting, it's a whole family behind it. So it's not something that you do by just taking a quick decision. And then you have the labor unions that you have to interact with. You have the workforce that you have to also engage and find alternatives for them, even if you're going to do any engagement. So while reducing the cost of government is something that is on the table, it's not something that happens by fiat. It's a process, and there is a process going on the government led by a special committee that I chair. On the issue of that we are growing especially well in the non-oil sector, why are we still borrowing? Earlier on in my presentation, I had said we still have the lowest public expenditure to GDP ratio. At 16, even at 16 trillion is the highest budget we have ever attained. But total GDP is at 169 trillion. So it means we're barely at a very low threshold compared to where government expenditure is supposed to be. It means the aggregate GDP in the country, government's contribution is really very small compared to what the rest of the economy is contributing. Government should actually be able to spend more, especially on infrastructure, so that we can fast track the growth that we aspire to. And to be able to spend more, it's either you're limiting yourself by sticking to just the revenue that you have, or you borrow to be able to deploy more infrastructure and more investments in human capital development. Do you want to add anything, Honorable Minister? Oh, did you? Okay, so can we proceed to the next?
Before we move into the next round of questions, with the kind permission of the Honorable Minister, the Chairman FRS would like to make some points, if it suits you. Clarification.
Please proceed.
Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to make one small clarification. In the case of comparing Nigerian population to that of South Africa and Saudi Arabia, I mistakenly stated 10 million South Africa as against Saudi Arabian citizens as against 35 million. So it was when the issue of the rate at which the world population, the youth population is growing as over 70% that I decided to Google and found out that there was a rapid growth from the 10 million I used to know about 3 years ago to about 35 million people today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The floor is open. Please, Mr. Okoye, wherever you are, please kindly indicate. Okay, you can go ahead. Just ask the question, please.
Minister for Finance, please, I want to ask, the revenue federal government is generating, is it inclusive of the money collected from consumers of electricity? Do the power sector, the operators of the power sector, the discos, for instance, do they declare what they collect from local government and states as revenue? Because we were told during privatization
that the federal, state, and local government own 40% of the value chain in privatized power sector. As we speak today, I heard you talk about blocking shortage leakages. We are not sure of how much is generated from the states and local governments as electricity revenue, because at that level, there are no meters to build an estimation. And we expect that the federal, state, and local government should have a certain percentage of payment from what the discos are generating. Secondly, in blocking leakages that was mentioned here, the issue is the partial implementation of the power sector against consumers is creating leakages among citizens of Nigeria today. The Section 80, 81, and 82 of the Electric Power Sector Reform Act is on consumer protection and licensing performance standards. Yet, no institution or structure of government is implementing consumer protection in the power sector. So it has left consumers of the sector vulnerable to the distribution companies unchecked. There is what you call unfair business practices. The question is, the 41.5 million MSMEs, according to Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, almost all of them depend on generators to operate. And they are giving bills on estimation that doesn't follow estimated billing methodology. So my question is, number one, do the discos declare how much they collect from the states and local governments, and do they give a certain percentage of revenue from this area to the federal government? Number two, in blocking leakages in the power sector, does the government have a plan in place to put a structure in place for consumer protection in the electricity sector? Because NEC, NEMSA, TCN were all created from Electric Power Sector Reform Act, but nothing has been created for protection of Nigerian consumers in that sector. Secondly, I'm very happy the Honorable Minister for Information is here. There is a correlation between information, just like the Director of Budget said that budget is a moral document. The question is, the number of us here are representing the 200 million Nigerians. It says geopolitical zones. Do the Ministry of Information have a plan in place to have a geopolitical zonal budget performance appraisal, enlightenment for citizens in the states and zones? Because when you look at insecurity and agitation from the states today, the allegation is that some people say they are abandoned and they are marginalized in allocation of federal projects. If you look, we did in my organization, which is Association for Public Policy Analysis, we did a survey from 2016 to 2020. The Southeast had 5,242 capital projects, and it is valued at 449.4 billion naira. But we don't have any report as to implementation and the releases in that zone. We've approached the Ministry of Information severally, asking for town hall meeting to disabuse the mind of the people of the zone on the fact that they are being marginalized and abandoned in allocation of projects. Funny enough, no minister from that zone is interested in discussing this matter. So one thing is calling us here to discuss the budget. Another thing is evaluating the impact on citizens and making the citizens at the sub-national levels know how it goes. Finally, you've talked about education budget. What we have here, Honorable Minister, you will see children, Nigerians, sitting on bare floor like animals, some under trees to receive education in public schools, where over 188 billion has been appropriated for universal basic education. Now another amount is appropriated for basic education. The question is, how are these funds monitored at the state levels? Why is it that the state universal basic education boards are almost above God and nobody knows what they're doing, and we don't have information on that? Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ashoy. Questions? Okay. That man at the back.
Good afternoon, everyone. My question is to Chairman of FRS. My name is Ebuka Obuzian. My question is to Chairman of FRS. I love the analogy of South Africa and Nigeria. So we could see that the root cause of Nigerians not paying tax is social distrust. So how is the Ministry of Finance and the Federal Land Revenue engaging the National Orientation Agency and the populace on building trust so as to help raise revenue for the ministry.
Thank you. Any other person? Where are you, please?
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead. Let's have you.
Okay. Obasa Sedesa is my name. I work for Vanguard. Honorable Minister Mayu, in your presentation, you hinted about taking sanctions against revenue agencies who are unable to meet their targets. Can you elaborate on this more, and exactly what do you have in mind?
Honorable Minister, you may wish to give your response.
Thank you very much to everyone. Let me start first of all by addressing the very important issues that have been raised by Mr. Okoye. Is it Okoye or Okorie? Oh, Comrade Okorie. Okorie.
Association for Public Policy Analysis.
Okay, Comrade Okorie, you mentioned the issue of revenue being generated by the distribution companies, and as federal government and states own 40%, whether a percentage is come to the treasury, the answer is no. These are companies that have been privatized. What we expect is that these companies grow to pay taxes and also to pay dividends to the government. But up to now, you are familiar from what you have just said with the status of the Nigerian electricity sector industry. You know that none of these discos are reporting profits and therefore have not started paying taxes or remitting dividends to shareholders, which is not what has been hoped when the privatization was done. The privatization itself had been problematic, but of recent there is a lot of effort that we're undertaking, working together with the with the distribution companies to improve the performance of the sector. And also, you had suggested, and I will ask DG Budget also to speak to some of the work that we're doing with the electricity sector. You were also suggesting that the Minister of Information should have some kind of performance appraisal workshops or meetings, so the Minister of Information will take them. On the issue of the South is claiming that they are marginalized as a very important NGO. One of the reasons why we have our budgets as a public documents is that NGOs like you should be able to use the budget yourselves and make your own analysis. So I invite you to visit the budget. The details are there for every ministry, department, and agency. Do your analysis and extract information of investments that federal government has done or expenditure of federal government in the southeast part of the country. It shouldn't be that the government has to make that analysis and you do it independently. Because when we give you, perhaps the next thing is we will be told that it is not true. So do the thing for yourself, the investments that we have. I know that the Southeast has benefited from a number of very major projects in the country. Right now, one of the largest projects that the government is investing in is the second Niger Bridge. And it is in the southeastern part of the country. It is well advanced. The president plans to commission it before the end of his tenure. So please, Comrade Okorie, make that effort. I will be glad really to see such an analysis from an independent non-governmental organization. On the issue of education, yes, we have a lot of work we need to do, but that is the federal government as well as the state. From what you know, I'm sure that the responsibility of education for the federal government is at the tertiary level, and this is provisions of the Constitution. The states have responsibility for secondary as well as primary education. So the investment of the federal government through the TET fund actually is largely at the tertiary level, and NUBEC has funds that the states can access to be able to fund both secondary as well as primary education. What we've seen is that most states are not accessing the funds that are sitting in UBEC because they are not able to raise that counterpart funding, which is what, 40%, right? 50. Okay, they're supposed to raise 50% and show evidence they have 50%, and then they can draw down 50% of their investment requirements from UBEC. So the campaign that you're doing, the work you're doing should really be focused at the states so that they can also do much more. Ebuka raised the issue of the root cause why we're not paying taxes as Nigerians, that is largely distrust. That I understand that to mean that people don't see the benefit of the taxes that are being paid and therefore are hesitating to pay taxes. But while that is partly true, it is also true that people in Nigeria, we have got used to living as a rentier state. When we didn't have oil, taxes were the major source of funding government. And people, I remember even as a kid, there's the tax collectors that go around in villages to actually collect taxes, and people were responsible in paying taxes. But since we found oil and jettisoned most of the productive activities, especially agriculture, that we used to undertake in, and government now was at the center, was just providing money to the states, and we're still doing that on an ongoing basis. And once a citizen has not been paying their tax, then they themselves do not have the moral standing to actually ask for accountability from their from the government. But if you pay your tax, you will feel more compelled. You have a more compelling reason to actually ask for accountability. So we need to be able to go back to that period where we're all responsible citizens and we're paying our taxes. That's the only way we can grow on a sustainable basis. Vanguard, the question you raised on the sanctions on the agencies, we have some provisions that we're looking to make in the Finance Act that we're currently working on. But in addition to that, we also have a robust monitoring mechanism that is regular and continuous, and tracking the performance and alerting these agencies where they're already falling short. Because it didn't used to happen a long time ago. People just work and tracking is not done. So by the time you make an assessment and the underperformance is reported, it's already late. So we're doing more constant tracking and monitoring, continuous, that is monthly reconciliations, is being done with the revenue generating agencies, and specific sanctions may be provided either in the Finance Act or be directed by the President, because that's a discussion that is ongoing. An agency that continuously defaults on their target should actually, the leadership of those agencies will have to face some consequences. I'd like to stop here and first invite the Honorable Minister of Information to intervene, and then the DG Budget.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister and colleagues. Comrade Okolie, I'm glad that I thought we were only two comrades here, myself and Isaremo. Apparently we are three. Comrade Okolie, I don't think it's correct to say that the federal government, especially my ministry, has been running away from a town hall meeting to consider issues of infrastructure all over the country. To the best of my knowledge, I've had not just a town hall meeting in Enugu to evaluate the federal government, involvement, in the infrastructure, but also I took a 3-day tour about the time of 2018 to inspect the projects between Port Harcourt, Enugu, and Enugu. And we stopped at every major project being financed by the federal government. I think it was which is what's the name of this bond that we took from the, not Eurobond, the Sukuk, yes, Sukuk. And I remember that at least 5 projects that were being financed by Sukuk along that road. 2, I also remember that only last year, Wednesday, at the Federal Executive Council meeting, a memo came to council in which the federal government came to the rescue of the university of the Nnamdi Azikiwe University in Awka, where contracts were awarded in year 2005 and 2011 by the university were unable to be completed, 5 projects. And the federal government came to the aid of the university and approved, just last Wednesday, about, I think, about 600 million or 800 million, naira, worth of projects just to complete it. So I want to disabuse your mind. This federal government does not discriminate against any particular part of the country. We do conduct regular town hall meetings in every part of the country. This time, 2 weeks ago, I was both in Katsina to discuss the issue of banditry with the governor of Katsina State. It was a mini town hall meeting. And 2 days after, I was in Maiduguri to also have another town hall meeting to discuss the issue of the vandalization of infrastructure, especially power and telecommunications in that part of the country. Before then, we did hold 2 town hall meetings which were supposed to address the issue of vandalization of roads and rail in Abuja, and the issue of vandalization also of a pipeline. Yeah, you might ask me, why didn't I go to the southeast or south-south to hold those meetings? It's because the security situation there now does not probably encourage one to host our town hall meetings there. But we will continue as soon as situations improve to go to every part of the country to ensure that we have this kind of town hall meeting. But I want to assure you, Comrade Okori, that this government makes no distinction between any part of the country in the manner it spreads infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. I think you've spoken mostly to Comrade Okoria's issues that I wanted to this thing, but it's just to, again, on Scott's point, the discourse do not belong to government. Government is still, however, a shareholder, a 40% shareholder in those discos that have been privatized. But as a shareholder, you don't collect, you don't receive a part of the revenues of that the company collects. You share in the profit of the company, when the company makes a profit and declares a dividend. So we're not collecting, the billings of the discos is not part of, government's revenues. On the contrary, because the electricity tariff that we currently pay, does not cover the cost of producing the power. There is a shortfall in the tariff which government is paying on behalf of the citizens. And in this budget for 2022, this tariff shortfall is projected at 300 billion naira. And that's what we've, provided for it. So instead of, saying, yeah, this is money that we have to pay. So you heard when the Oil Minister was making a presentation earlier on, he talked about an additional 37 billion naira, provided for MDA's, electricity debts. That's something that, and that's government trying to lead, by example. Many MDAs are defaulting in paying their electricity bills. So while we're trying to resolve the historical situation, going forward, we're going to also tighten up and create a mechanism where, MDAs can't simply incur electricity debts or other utility debts and leave them, behind. So to answer your question, instead of us receiving money from the discos in this budget, we're actually in provision in this budget to pay money to the discos. And even the discos are at the collecting end, but then there's a chain. They have to pay, when you pay them, they have to pay the GENCOs who deliver power to them. The GENCOs in turn have to pay the gas companies that supply them the gas, which they generate the power. So what has happened now, however, is that the system has been tightened. There's what is called a waterfall payment mechanism designed by the central bank. So every electricity bill paid to any disco in this country can only be paid into a bank account. And that bank account, every money that goes in there, there's a waterfall arrangement that determines how that money is shared by every part of the chain. How much of it the disco keeps, how much goes to the GENCOs, how much goes to the gas suppliers, and all of that. And this is something under the purview of this central bank and the power sector recovery plan committee, of which I am a member. So it's not. Then the other point you said, consumer protection. Nobody is looking at it. That's not true. That's the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. That's part of their mandate. And I'm aware that where they do get this thing, they take action, whether they have sanctioned, discourse. So if there are specific complaints, direct them to NEC and hold them to account. But the matter of unmetered, power consumers, that's one of the things that there's a national action plan, to address. And I think all across the country you will notice that the metering is improving. The problem of metering is not just about ability of the meters, but even the skilled manpower to install and deploy these meters. The meters that are being installed now are smarter meters and no longer the old NEPA meters. So people are being trained and skilled up to there is a government and the banks supported program to procure and deploy meters, as many as 6 million meters, and that's being tracked. And this committee that is under the overall chairmanship of the Vice President and the Honourable Minister of Finance, Mr. Vice Chair. Yes, yes. Basically sits as a steering committee, atop this. I chair the technical committee on finance, and this is being tracked. As I said, there's a power sector, what we call a power sector recovery plan, and the goal is to get that sector back to viability, where by 2025, they're delivering all of the power that this economy needs, and we have, fully cost-reflective tariffs, and we have consumers metered, and we have a well-functioning and viable, power sector. Thank you.
Honorable Minister, we will just take these two quick ones from the online participants. The first one is from King Thomas. He said, please, all we have been hearing is figures for the education and health sector. Big figures, but we do not see the effect of this amount spent. Trillions spent on education last year was spent in which schools, in which states? The second one is from Kabiru Sadiq, an undergraduate student of economics at the University of Lagos. He said, my question for the Honorable Minister of Finance has to do with the debt servicing for the budget. I would like to ask for the minister's thoughts, as some persons in the government are saying the debt are still within a reasonable limit, just as the President mentioned yesterday. Thank you. The Honorable Minister may wish to give a response. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, King Thomas, yes, the numbers are big. I'm glad that you're saying the numbers are big for health and education. Please, again, that's why we have the details of the budget. We can't read the whole budget in this forum. The details have the line-by-line item that makes up these amounts that are budgeted to both education and health. I hope you do use the budget to select projects that are within your community to check on the performance of those projects, and use the iMonitor that is in the Budget Office website to give us your feedback. The essence of this monitoring tool that is provided in the Budget Office website is so that citizens can get involved in tracking budget performance. So they are not just numbers, they are detailed projects, and I invite you to check the details on the website. On the issue of debt service, it is my opinion, and I've said this over and over again, that Nigeria's debt is at very sustainable levels. In fact, it is low compared to the size of our economy. The Brentwood Institutions, IMF, World Bank says that an economy the size of Nigeria should be able to borrow up to 50% of its GDP for us to have infrastructure development and growth that is meaningful. So we're at 21.6%. Again, what we have is a revenue problem that we're working on to ensure that we're able to fully fund the operations of government as well as service our debt obligations.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I don't know how many questions.
Okay, sorry. DG Budget has some information for King Thomas.
Well, asking for where the money is being spent on education, at the least, that the teachers are not being owed salaries, and that's a significant portion of the expenditure. Over the last 1 year, the federal government has set up 18 new tertiary institutions, 6 universities, 6 polytechnics, and 6 colleges of education, one in each of the geopolitical zones. And if you want the exact locations, the information is available on that aspect, I believe, on our website. That costs money. There's ongoing, construction projects in those things. Again, as the Honourable Minister said earlier, we're discussing the federal government's budget here, and the federal government's budget for education is focused on tertiary education. The federal government only owns about 104 unity schools in terms of secondary schools. And in terms of primary schools, probably by extension, the university primary schools, that's as close as it comes, or maybe the army schools or the Navy schools and whatever. The rest of the schools that you're looking to see money being spent on, you will not see it straight from here. Apart from the provision, basic education is not in the purview of the federal government. But there is, through UBEC, you know, the government makes a provision of funding. So like for 2022 is 108 billion naira. And it says, look, you states, you have primary responsibility for basic education. However, we will create this fund to support you in developing infrastructure for basic education. Basic education is primary through, secondary, in particular, JS. But, you know, we will match you. So we've set up this 108 billion naira for 2022. You come up with your own 108 billion naira, and we will give you as matching grant. And therefore, if the states did so, there will be investment of 216 billion naira in 2022 going into, structure and basic education. But as the minister said, many of the states don't come up with their own matching grants. And so a lot of these funds are sitting idle with, with UBEC. The law requires that it is spent on that matching fund basis to try and catalyze and, you talk about health. The basic healthcare provision fund, the Honourable Minister of Health can speak perhaps to it. Again, a similar arrangement. We have 54 billion naira. Part of it is available for matching investments with states to invest in primary healthcare. But they come up with their own whatever. That may not. So, as said earlier, this advocacy, has to go beyond just with the federal, government. Thank you.
Okay. So, wrap up before the MC invites the ComSec Finance to give a vote of thanks is to emphasize for us what is new in this budget is that we had been able to bring in significant additional revenues from independent revenues of government-owned enterprises, as well as IGRs from ministries, departments, and agencies. And also that we have introduced a gender lens to our budgeting processes, and we will be tracking the performance of budgets and monitoring the performance with a gender lens as one of the major criteria. And agencies will be encouraged to do more, and where we see agencies are doing more, there will also be benefits in that regard. This is the first, and the reason for us is that when you reach women, you actually are reaching a very important part of the society that have been more exposed to vulnerability than other members of the society, and by extension, you're also reaching children. So on this note also, I want to also ask participants to check the incremental provisions that we have made specifically for the Ministry of Women Affairs, but that these provisions are cutting across all budgets of all the ministries, departments, and agencies. Each ministry has some program or project that will be subjecting to that gender sensitivity review. I think for me that's the final word, except to now hand it over to the MC.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in the course of this public presentation of the budget, we've been able to share very useful information. We've been able to exchange some constructive ideas. This interaction to me has repositioned us to know precisely that we are working towards good service delivery to all Nigerians. I want to thank you all. At this point, I would like to invite the Permanent Secretary of Finance, Federal Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Malam Aliu Hamid, to please step forward to the podium to give the vote of thanks. Permanent Secretary, sir.
Thank you very much, MC. The Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Dr. Zainab Shamsuna Ahmed, Honorable Minister of Information and Culture, Alaji Comrade Lai Mohammed, Honorable Minister of Health, Mr. Osage Ehanire, who was with us a while ago, the Permanent Secretary, Special Duties, Federal Minister of Finance, Alhaji Aliyu Shehu Shinkafi, Chairman Governing Board, National Bureau for Statistics, Dr. Kabir Nakaura, Chairman Federal Inland Revenue Service, Malam Mohammed Nami, Senior Special Assistant to the President on National Assembly Matters, House of Reps, Honorable Umar El Yaqub, DG Budget Office of the Federation, Mr. Ben Akabweze, the Accountant General of the Federation, Malam Ahmed Idris, DG Debt Management Office, Mrs. Patience Oniha, distinguished ladies and gentlemen of the Fourth Estate of the Realm, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, still good afternoon. This is really to thank you all for honoring our invitation to this all-important public presentation of the 2022 Executive Budget Proposal. We had the detailed presentation of the budget from the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning. We also had robust engagement from the audience with equally fulsome responses from the high table, Minister of Finance, Minister of Information and Culture, DG Budget, and Chairman Inland Revenue Service. As we heard from the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, the essence of this engagement is to harvest your views, and it's a public enlightenment event to further enrich this process. We thank you all for your very intense and robust engagement. We do know that this is a hybrid event. A number of people also participated virtually in addition to those in this room. We thank you all for your inputs and for your views. And we take your views extremely, very seriously. Budget process is not a single event, and we are happy to continue to engage with you beyond this public presentation. Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning earlier spoke about the iMonitor Budget app and the Citizens Portal. These are vital tools for your continuous engagement and tracking budget performance. Please track the performance and give us feedback, especially in those areas that the minister said we have introduced into this budget. That is the gender lens. Take the budget, look at them, and then see the allocation to various MDAs and see how each MDA performs in this particular new area. That would definitely inform our experience for the next budget and even to refine this budget. You can be rest assured that those inputs will be used for continuous enrichment of these and future budgets. On this note, I wish to express our profound gratitude once again and to thank you all for your participation. I cannot end this without thanking our very eloquent and indefatigable MC for making this event run so smoothly and seamlessly. Let me end this by saying Godspeed to you all as you commit back to your various destinations, and wish you a most pleasant weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Permanent Secretary, for that modest vote of thanks. Before we bring this public presentation to an end, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to all our online participants, I want to assure you that we are collating all your questions and your comments. We are going to give our responses. Just check the ministry's website. I can assure you that. At this point, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you. We have come to the end of this presentation. May we please rise as we take the national anthem, please. Thank you. God bless
Yeah.
you.
Okay, this is the embassy advice.